I don't open the door for strangers. That's a rule I've followed my entire life. But when he knocked that night, something about it felt off. It wasn't the knock itself. It was the way he said my name, like he'd known me for years. Except, I had never seen him before in my life. I live alone in a small apartment just outside the city. It's nothing fancy. Just a one-bedroom place with old creaky floors and a drafty window in the living room. I moved here 6 months ago after switching jobs. New start, new city, new life. I don't have many friends here. Just a few coworkers I talk to occasionally. And my landlord, who's the type to show up unannounced but never sticks around long enough to chat. I'm a pretty private person. I don't post much online, I keep to myself, and I definitely don't give out my address to random people. That night, I was home alone, just like any other night. It was late, maybe 11:30 p.m. I was half asleep on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Not aggressive, not timid, just steady, deliberate. I frowned. Nobody ever came by this late. I set my phone down, got up, and walked to the door. I hesitated for a second, then looked through the peephole. A man stood outside. Mid-40s, average build, dark jacket. His head was tilted slightly downward, as if he was listening for something. And then, in the calmest, most casual voice imaginable, he said, "Hey Josh, you in there?" My stomach dropped. I didn't recognize him, and I sure as hell never told him my name. I stood frozen, barely breathing. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he had the wrong apartment, maybe he was looking for the previous tenant. But no, he said my name. Clearly, like he knew me. I didn't respond. I just stayed there, watching him through the peephole. He didn't knock again. He just stood there, waiting. And then, slowly, he turned his head toward the peephole, like he knew I was watching. I backed away from the door, heart pounding. My first instinct was to call someone, but who? The police? What would I even say? A guy knocked on my door and said my name? It wasn't a crime to knock. I waited, listened. A full minute passed, then another. And then, just as I started convincing myself that he had left, I heard it. Not a knock. Something much worse. The sound of my front door handle turning. I felt sick. He was testing the lock, checking if he could get inside. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold it. Then, silence. No more knocking. No more turning the handle. I crept back toward the door and looked through the peephole again. He was gone. I stood there for what felt like forever, straining to hear any sound from the hallway. Eventually, I convinced myself that he'd left, and I went back to the couch, knife still in hand. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping that night, but just as I was starting to relax, my phone buzzed. A text message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. "Why didn't you let me in?" My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't respond. I blocked the number and turned my phone off. The rest of the night was agonizing. Every tiny creak in the apartment made me jump. I barely slept. The next morning I told myself it was over. Maybe a prank, maybe some weird mistake. I even convinced myself that I had misheard him saying my name, until I checked my door. There, right beneath the peephole, was a single word, scratched into the wood. Soon. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never saw him again, but I still wonder, how did he know my name? And why did he want me to open the door?